is to be the bridge between silos. And taking that analogy of an object-oriented enterprise-wide content management system, think of it as a content API, an organizational content API, where we go, okay, keep your invoice data. I just need this, give it to me. I don't care how you do it. So we're wrapping a content model around the whole organizational data set. Now, granted, you have to have a content audit and know what you have that we are wrapping this wrapper around. But that's kind of be the theme, I think, for next year's conference, is actually approaching the enterprise as an object and all the silos as sub-objects. How do we span those objects? And really talking to the developers in their terms, talking to management in their terms, and we have to get a lot more savvy about selling our vision, because we know what we want, we know what we need. We just need to get buy-in from the executive level management. So Naz yesterday spoke a little bit about how do you access the people who have the power and purse strings. All right, say we've done that. Now we've got our head count. Now we've done our content engineering. Now we have to get this thing delivered. And that takes leadership. And that takes Joe.
There we go. Are we working? Yeah, good. There we are. There we are. Okay, well, welcome to the virtual track attendees. Welcome to everybody. I too felt the pain of rolling out of bed this morning after last night. It was quite a bit of fun, actually. So in terms of firing up the slides, you've got the, okay. Yeah. So I really enjoyed Cruce's warm-up, and I almost see that we're coming at the same problem, but probably from the two different directions. You know, it's fascinating to me to hear him speaking, basically, and zeroing in on basically the same view of things, but from the customer experience management side. Whereas I've lived my life typically working inside very large institutions and sort of the internal workings and machinery to try and come out. And it's heartwarming to find that we're actually meeting. It's kind of like when they dug the channel under the English Channel. It was so gratifying that they actually met. Also, last year I got lots of nice feedback on my talk. It was the 10 secrets of success for sort of content initiatives. And the center of the positive feedback was it was so grounded, it was so practical, it was so actionable. And so I basically had that in my mind to start today. But I arrived, and the conference here has had a lot of interesting discussions going on, and not least of which are discussions with Bruce. And we were chatting away, and this has now sent me into my usual big ideas slapping you in the face. So I apologize for that. The phrase I threw into this description was content leadership, which I'm not familiar with it being used very widely. So I'm forever trying to coin phrases that are not in current circulation. And it's a different and a difficult idea. So we're going to do a little bit of a quick run through here. And then right after this, I have an hour-long session for those who are intrigued enough to see me go to the next level. But basically, I'm going to invite you to join me on the journey to try and get a sense of what the dark arts of content leadership might be. I sometimes get teased about mixing metaphors, so we've gone from the heroic Wolverine to Homer. Again, I've worked basically in some of the world's largest institutions and have been at this game for, well over 25 years. And I'm forever running into the fact that most organizations, indeed probably all organizations I deal with, are in some ways like this. That they are fundamentally challenged in dealing with the new technologies, the fact that they are forever standing on a burning platform, as our friends at Nokia described it. There's change in the business world, there are issues, and they fundamentally struggle to basically get the right information to the right people, not only to do their daily business, but to adapt. And this is the problem. So a bit like what Cruz was saying, and I love the phrase, hacking the enterprise. That's going to be a t-shirt, almost for sure. That in some ways, when we think about content, we have the familiar challenges ahead of us. We also, however, are looking at how content can be almost like a key ingredient, an elixir, a catalyst, something that can be used to help organizations fundamentally get out of this predicament, to, again, as Cruz said, to get healthy. So in a way, this is good news. It means that the content business has a much bigger job ahead of it. The bad news is the content business has a much bigger job ahead of it. So I'll shell back to X-Men. Control. So in these organizations, control is the fashion. This is obvious. You know, you can't manage what you can't measure. You must ultimately have some controls in place. But it's interesting, you know, as I work in these different organizations, to see how they struggle with control and how the outcomes are often ambiguous. We will go into more detail into this later, but it really, really touches on the fact that it's a double-edged sword. And if you start using control as a weapon and not as a tool to help people, it very quickly becomes an end in itself and very quickly leads you off track. An interesting phrase I always run into, and I immediately try to rebut, is information is an asset. And I said, oh, well, you should talk to your legal department. They, by and large, look at information as a liability. Right? And again, working in organizations, both at the macro level, how they speak to the world, I am always shocked and somewhat depressed by the level of spin that is put on everything. Like nobody can speak the truth, as it were. Everything is spun. And this percolates, it sort of permeates into the organization, and even our little projects are sometimes 10 times more expensive than they need to be because everybody has to be so circumspect and careful about how they're interacting with the other political players, the other silos. So this is a problem. Techno Philia. Again, organizations exhibit this strange love-hate relationship with technology. And it's not just our content technologies. It's not just content management systems and authoring tools and publishing platforms. It's actually all technology. We typically do this very, very badly. We do not acquire technology well. And as a consequence, what you normally see are the silver bullets being bought. And the reason for that is they're frequently taken as a way to offload responsibility. Oh, we have this product. That problem has an answer sort of taped over it, so we're good. That doesn't work. I was joking with Keith about how people give me a hard time if I don't put an obscure history slide into one of my presentations. So here it is, right in the middle. Basically, where do we look for an answer? And as I would, I find my answer in around 1494, give or take. And I look to the invention and the first documentation in Italy of double entry bookkeeping, the birth of modern accounting, which is quite exciting. But what is exciting, believe it or not, is what you see is an example of one of the early ledgers. And what is interesting about that? What would get Joe so very excited about a 500-year-old accounting ledger? It's the words. The way they did double entry bookkeeping back in the day is that you had entries where you had a full description. You actually had a textual explanation for what the entry was about. Then you had the numbers. You basically had the transactions registered. It meant that you had an integrated view or integrated content. So compared to accounting today, where you're forever being called up by accounting going, what's this? What's that? Why is this? Or dealing with exceptions. The old-fashioned accounting was profoundly transparent. I'm not sure Enron would have survived with this being in place. So that's why I say, it's the content. So who are you going to call? It's like Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? Of course, Professor X. Which as I grow older, I'm feeling uncomfortably similar. I think it's time to shave the gray goatee, yeah. So, again, very much picking up on the path that Cruz was following, content is a core enterprise asset. It's like money, like talent. It's one of the things that moves between your silos, between your business operations, and actually connects it. And this is something that makes content a much more valuable and much more important asset than I think even we as content professionals appreciate. So what do? We have to mobilize the assets. We have to mobilize the people, the content professionals, the expertise in this. We have to somehow bring everything together so we can produce integrated content assets. And of course I was thinking of, Halle Berry as Storm, as mastering the elements. And of course, unfortunately, if we do head out on this path, we find that the work is hard. It's much easier to keep our heads down, stay in our work groups, and not venture out. But the fact is, we have to do it. We have to reach out across the teams and do, again, as Chris was saying, we have to help start building connections. We have to give people almost a framework and a place to build their connections. So it's hard work. So I chose Rogue here because her power is that she can quickly absorb other mutant powers. And in fact, that's what we wind up doing. We're trying to pull things together into a common asset. Mixing metaphors, but still within the Marvel universe. Iron Man. Content technology is one of the other phrases I've been championing, saying there is a discrete technology field called content technologies. And under there we find content management systems, authoring environments, the tools we use to work with content as content. And because I spend most of my time battling with technology groups and CIOs and CTOs, I'm forever bringing them back to, like I try to convey with this diagram, we have to appreciate content as something unique and special. It's not just the little data sets that you have in various databases. It's not the sea of Word documents that were written at a particular time, a particular place, for a particular person. It is an asset that brings together a lot of things and makes it liquid, makes it something we can use in many other ways. So basically I'd say content technology strives to treat content as content, to respect the content. Now that's an echo back to my talk a couple years ago, Breaking Bad Content. Respect the content instead of respect the chemistry. So I always will say content, in addition to my sort of obscure defining it as potential information, I also say when you really look at it, it is a complex composite artifact, which if you deconstruct that, has its own scientific meaning. Okay, say we're going to do this. We're charging ahead. We're going to start crossing the chasm between the silos, building bridges, helping people connect, almost at a secondary, almost it's the substratum in Aristotelian terms. That's probably quite helpful, isn't it? No. So we're trying to find a level at which we can build connections amongst the business units where we're one step below the politics, one step below the spin, where we actually do focus on the truth. What is it we're trying to build? What is it our customers really need? How will our products need to evolve? What are other people, it's the nuts and bolts. And I find if you get down to if you find the right level, you actually can make connections across, disciplinary boundaries of unfathomable width. And people can get down to the business of making things better. But this is hard. So I chose Wolverine here because it's a frustrating task. It requires a couple things, including not a little aggression. And this, again, will be something I will be hammering on in the next session, is how we need to come to terms with the fact that as content professionals, as content teams, when we start looking at this problem, we're going to be asked to change. We ourselves have to change to sort of step up to the role of content leadership. We have to be able to, drop the gloves in Canadian parlance and do battle with people who are very adept at playing the game. So it's something where the little anger management problem that Wolverine so delightfully exhibits can be a useful resource. Another thing, and when Cruz and I got together, I think it was on Friday afternoon, just by happenstance, we got down to this last point here, which was the change that we initiate or we instigate as sort of content innovators, modernizers, is much bigger than we ever expect. You know, the magnitude of the change management that is required of everyone involved, the content teams, the writers, everybody, and the collaborators, the specialists, it is much bigger. And this means that we need to give due accordance to change management. Sticking with Wolverine, the other endearing quality of Wolverine, and probably the thing that makes him the centerpiece of much of the sort of the X-Men sort of history, is his resilience. Obviously, you can burn him, break him, crush him, and he always comes back. And this is, probably a little dauntingly, this is what we have to be a bit like. As we venture out into this task of helping to hack the enterprise with our content, with content technologies, we will face setbacks, we will face obstacles. And the point is that you can bounce back and that you just keep on coming. So persistence pays off. And this leads us into a bit of a wrap-up story. Maybe because my slides are often a little ugly, Jack sometimes, and earlier this week, said, you could just turn off the slides and tell stories. So in a way, that's what I'm going to do at this instant. It's basically how I came to learn the essence of the word leadership. So we have lots of leadership camps and courses and whatnot. Very rarely do I hear them actually come at okay, well, what exactly is leadership? Well, I'll tell you the story of how I came to learn that lesson. It was so basically there was a staff sergeant in the US Army in the artillery, ugly. In fact, this is Sergeant Barnes from the movie Platoon, and this particular sergeant with whom I was dealing made Sergeant Barnes look like a cupcake. So we're talking grizzled and hardened. Well, I was sent to be part of a composite unit between Canadian and US artillery units, and I was put in charge as a young lieutenant of one of the batteries. And I was all of 22 years old. Well, guess what the grizzled sergeant thinks of a 22-year-old Canadian lieutenant? Not very much at all. So every day, I got there the first day, and basically he stared at me all the time. Every time I looked up, he was staring at me. Sometimes he was sharpening his knife. I said, I'm getting a really bad feeling about this. And he really didn't look like he had much time for me. But sadly, I was the officer, so technically I was in charge. And happily, I was quite good as an artillery officer. I knew my stuff inside and out. So that was, at least I was non-embarrassing at that level. First night, we were then sent on a night mission where you basically move an entire battery. And this is actually pre-GPS, pre-much of the gizmos we rely on today. And it was a heavily clouded night, pitch black. Like I would not be able to see anyone, even my own hand. It was black. And when you do these moves, you basically have no lights on. So you literally are fumbling through the dark. Well, it turns out we were trying to follow this little road. It was really more of a trail. And at one point, there was things all had been smashed up. And we wound up going down what appeared to be the trail, but turned out to not be the trail. And then we hit a huge pothole, and then another one. So I got out, and I looked around, and I put my little flashlight with the red light, and I said, oh, I think I know where we are. We're in the middle of the impact area, which is one of the places you do not want to be. For a number of reasons. One, you have to radio in right away and say, don't shoot. Second is, the place is littered with unexploded munitions. So I realized, okay, this sergeant's going to finish me off later, so I might as well find a way. I have to get the battery out of there and get back to our mission. So I got out and I said, well, I'll walk in front and I will run a little zigzag, and I'll hold my flashlight down with the red filter on, and you will follow me out. And we'll find a path out and we'll get out of here. And that's what we did. It took forever. It took over an hour to get the battery turned around and get us out of there. We eventually got to our position, got set up. I got in trouble, but that's normal. The next day, we had our orders group, where I brought the sergeant and all the gun detachment commanders together, and we were going through tonight's night mission. And at the end, I sort of went, I'll try not to get us lost this time. And he was still staring at me. He was still staring at me. And then he said, "Don't worry, sir. We will follow you." And it took me about 20 years to figure out what the heck. It was shocking. It was very surprising. You know, he had come around. And basically, years later, I realized what he saw and what I actually didn't appreciate at the time was I had put myself at risk as the human minesweeper. So, and the area that we happened to be in was known as a favorite target for what's firing white phosphorus rounds, which is about the worst way to go. If you're going to go, you do not want to get roasted by white phosphorus. So I'm out. So it was because I was an idiot, basically, that he decided I was worth following. But what that really means is I put the mission, the objective, that we had to get our battery to a particular location at a particular time, ahead of myself, and I put the safety of the entire battery and all the people in it ahead of myself. And to this grizzled sergeant, it meant, and because I was reasonably competent, he said, "Okay, you've passed the test." What that means is, if you're going to be pushing out from your sort of cozy space as content professionals, earning the points, as we're basically proving yourself, making the contributions, sacrificing to some extent yourself for the benefit of others wins points. And as you're building connections, it's sort of the most, along with the content, it's one of the things that's most enduring. And that is all.
I love your slides. You're the best.